The following report contains some disturbing images.
In 3 horrific years in Syria, no single incident has been worse than the chemical attack that killed and injured so many people in the rebel-held suburbs of Damascus a year ago. The West and the rebels blamed the Assad regime. It denied the charge. The Americans had threatened trouble, unspecified, if mass casualties were inflicted by chemical weapons. When all these people were killed, US military action against the Assad regime looked certain. In Damascus at that time, supporters of President Assad were volunteering for militias, amid real anxiety about what the Americans might do. The war seemed to be at a turning point. In Britain, Parliament was recalled and voted against joining the Americans in bombing Syria. It was a big factor in America's decision to cancel the airstrikes at the last minute.
I think the policy that the American government followed on Syria, even before the chemical attacks, was tentative and indecisive. And I think it sent a signal to people in both the moderate rebels in Syria, but particularly to the extreme rebels in Syria, that we were not prepared to re-engage in this region.
For President Assad's supporters volunteering as human shields at potential targets in Damascus, the deal looked good. Syria would give up its chemical arsenal to lift the threat of an American attack. The Assad regime recovered its nerve. It believed the Americans had blinked first. History is full of what-ifs. A major reason why there's been no direct Western military intervention in the Syrian war has been fear of the consequences. Not just getting sucked into a political and military morass, but actively making matters worse, not better. But what if the Americans had bombed Assad's men? It would not have ended the war, but it might have changed the balance of power. It could have been the catalyst for more American support for Syrian insurgents who were also opposed to the jihadist group that was then called ISIS. That's certainly what Syrian fighters who were hoping for more Western support believe.
If American strikes had happened, the regime wouldn't have been strengthened. Islamic State wouldn't have been strengthened. Because the airstrikes didn't happen, the FSA is now having to fight the regime and Islamic State.
The conflict in Syria has evolved into a series of overlapping civil wars. You can see it in Aleppo, where I was earlier this summer. Okay. The Syrian government fights insurgents. Sometimes the insurgents also fight each other. ISIS, now rebranded as Islamic State, came into Syria from Iraq as an al-Qaeda offshoot. It has fought the anti-regime forces more than it's fought the Syrian regime itself. The rise of ISIS in Syria gave it a launch pad to storm back into Iraq. It's captured large amounts of American weaponry from the Iraqi army. Iraqi security forces were strengthening their positions on the edge of Baghdad in July against the Islamic State advance. IS has exploited the anger of Arab Sunnis, furious at the way Iraqi Shias have monopolized power. But now there's a new government in Baghdad. Iraq's best hope is that it will offer Sunnis enough to turn them away from IS. That won't happen easily.
We will not fight ISIS or any other terrorism as long as we haven't received our rights. And we will not fight terrorism or what is known as ISIS as long as the government has not stood up to terrorist Shia militias which butchers Sunnis.
The West is deeply involved in this crisis, even though it would prefer to stay out. Britain's deliveries of humanitarian aid could turn into a deeper military role, perhaps directed at the several thousand British and other European men who fight for IS. In Damascus this morning, families displaced by 3 years of fighting were going home after a local truce in their suburb between the regime and rebels. As the Syrian regime calms its capital, it's hoping for at least a tacit alliance with the US, Britain and France against Islamic State. That would be a remarkable turnaround for President Assad, who may already be the leader who's done best out of the last year. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.